Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD, General Physician. All my video lectures are mainly for educative purpose. In continuity with the previous series, today we are going to discuss regarding one of the very useful topic in your everyday practice, as well as very frequently asked in your theory, in your oral exam, and you will see in your family as well as society, etc. We call enteric fever, or we usually use the word typhoid fever. So enteric fever or typhoid fever, will be discussing that particular topic. As routine, we'll be discussing under this heading definition, etiology, pathophysiology, clinical features, investigations, differential diagnosis, treatment and complications. Typhoid fever is an infection by gram-negative bacteria. We call that as Salmonella typhi or Salmonella paratyphi A, B or C. This paratyphi fever is called paratyphi fever, and enteric fever is for both typhoid as well as paratyphoid fever. But by and large, the most common is Salmonella typhi, hence the common term utilized is typhoid fever. The transmission is from human, and particularly the human who are reservoir, who are harboring this microorganism in gallbladder, and they pass out in stool. Direct contact or indirect contact via contaminated food and water is the most common mode of transmission. We usually use the word fecal-oral route. So it is transmitted by a contaminated water, contaminated food, and by poor hygienic conditions. Children and young adults are more prone to. Overcrowding is one of the factors which can increase the incidence of typhoid fever, and most important part is a poor sanitations. By a clinical picture, usually we suspect a person to have a typhoid fever. That's why we use the word suspected or probable case of typhoid fever on clinical ground. But once you confirm the presence of microorganism in the blood, or microorganism is present in the bile or in the stool or urine, or you detect an antigen of typhoid fever, of Salmonella typhi or paratyphi, or you detect an antibody, then only you can use the word confirmed case of typhoid fever. This typhoid word has come from Greek word typhos, or we call smoke or cloud, that was believed to cause the disease or madness. And good number of time in the person who suffers from typhoid fever becomes delirious, and that was also called typhus, or it was also called as delirious stage. By and large, the typhoid fever will produce a classical group of symptoms and signs. So it is a bacterial infection which will have a very high grade fever, and usually it is a step ladder fever or stepwise fever, very commonly associated with diarrhea or constipation and vomiting, and it can become a fatal. And it is Salmonella typhi organism is a gram-negative rod-shaped flagellated bacteria, and human being is a reservoir. We usually use three words: suspected case, probable case, and confirmed case. Suspected case means any person who comes to with a fever, headache, abdominal discomfort for at least few days, and any one of at least three of the following, that is toxic look, respiratory involvement in the form of a bronchitis chest, we call crackles, tympanic abdomen, and palpable recessive spleen. This particular person is suspected. We can add one more, coated tongue. So these are the group of people whom you can call a suspected case. And if this suspected case is with Vidal test positive, that is if H titer is 1:60, after 1 week of fever, we'll label that as probable case. So any suspected case with a positive blood culture or significant rise in agglutination test, which is either done by a slide method or a tube method, or positive modified Vidal test, which is being demonstrable by rapid test, or we call typhoid dot test. But most important, gold standard is positive blood culture. Then only you can label that person as confirmed case. So confirmed case is fever with lab report confirming the culture positive for Salmonella typhi. Probable case is fever for at least 3 days. There is a serodiagnosis either by a Vidal test or by a rapid test. But Salmonella typhi is not isolated in a culture. Good number of times this will happen because of self-medication with antibiotics. While chronic carrier is the person who is harboring this microorganism in a gallbladder, and you demonstrate the presence of Salmonella typhi in stool or urine after 1 year of infection, then we call that as a chronic carrier. We know very well relapse means when the person who had a typhoid fever, who was serum positive, and after treatment the temperature became normal, symptom signs disappears. Now after a gap of few weeks, if symptoms and signs reappears and the bacilli have not been completely removed, some cases of relapse are more than once, and this is a very common phenomena in an enteric fever. Recrudescence means poor treatment or poor compliance of the patient, incomplete treatment, short duration of treatment, the person gets reappearance of symptoms and signs, that we call as a recrudescence. So we usually use these terms: typhoid fever or paratyphoid fever, complicated or uncomplicated typhoid fever. Then we call suspected or probable case or confirmed case or carrier. Relapse, recrudescence, and ideally I should have, sorry by mistake it is again we have written relapse, it should be recurrent. Recurrent means after complete cure, now there is a infection by a second group of Salmonella typhi, that we call as recurrence. Again the person gets infected by a re-entrance of a Salmonella typhi. So clinical syndrome of Salmonella is also called salmonellosis, where you get an enteritis. Usually person will present with an acute gastroenteritis, or person can present as an enteric fever. Occasionally person can present as a septicemia, and they can go into a stage we call as asymptomatic carrier stage, where gallbladder becomes a reservoir for Salmonella typhi. So we have got typhoid fever and paratyphoid fever, and paratyphoid can be divided into A, B and C. Enterobacteria will include Shigella, Salmonella, Escherichia coli and Vibrio. We are not going into detail regarding this, but if there is an infection by a Salmonella typhi, then we call as a typhoid fever. And if there is an infection by paratyphi ABC, we call paratyphoid fever. And if it is by any one of these two organisms, we usually label that as enteric fever. So we stop here. So Salmonella can be Salmonella cholera, Salmonella enteritidis, and Salmonella typhimurium. Usually this typhimurium will be responsible for gastroenteritis, while cholera suis will be responsible for septicemia. Transmission is mainly by contaminated food and beverages, or we call even a fluid, that can be water, milk, etc., or by consumption of sewage contaminated water and shellfish, or using a contaminated toilet and neglecting a hand hygiene. This particular organism will be transmitted very frequently by a food handlers who are often asymptomatic and they are carrier. That will be the most common cause of transmission of infection from one human being to another human being because of poor hygiene. So we call food fomites, finger, etc. It is very common in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean islands, etc. Travelers will be more prone to, and if anything, because microorganism, this Salmonella typhi survives even at low pH. So if you even try to reduce the gastric acidity, that will further aggravate the multiplication of Salmonella organism by using antacids, proton pump inhibitor, H2 receptor blocker, or if you create an achlorhydria. Also, there is a genetic polymorphism in this which dampens the effect of macrophages, and that can further aggravate. So there will be lot of conditions which can aggravate the incidence of Salmonella typhi infection like AIDS, glucocorticoids, person who is on glucocorticoids, or malignancy, or person who has got impaired phagocytic function like hemoglobinopathies, chronic granulomatous disease, malaria, histoplasmosis, schistosomiasis, even very young age or very old age, person who are on antacids, or person who are on proton pump inhibitors, etc., or person has got altered intestinal function like inflammatory bowel disease, prior antibiotic therapy, etc. All this can aggravate. Incubation period is right from 10 days to 15 days. Transmission is by the contaminated food or contaminated drinking water, which is contaminated by infected fecal matters. The most common material which is contaminating is a fecal matter, and that is very commonly done because of the poor hygienic conditions. Washing fruits and vegetables can spread it if contaminated water is used. Occasionally it can be also spread by a flies. That's why we call finger, phlomites, flies, etc. Fecal matter, fluids, food, all those with F we call. And once it enters from the oral, so that's why it is called feco-oral route, it bypasses the stomach acid media and it will go to the small intestine. So feces and urine from a carrier or the case who is an active at present. So from an active case who is shedding those particular microorganisms, or from the carrier, that will contaminate water, soil, flies, finger, etc. So that contaminated material is consumed. Person is not having a good hygienic conditions, or flies can also be responsible, or from a contaminated milk, contaminated water, etc. So reservoir or the active case which can transmit this particular infection by a fecal-oral route, and there is a classical called typhoid Mary who transmitted this infection. So you can have a carrier of three varieties we call convalescent carrier, who continue to shed the bacilli in the feces for 3 weeks to 3 months. Temporary means who sheds more than 3 months to up to 1 year, and a chronic carrier who excrete the bacilli even after 1 year. So from a primary source, it is transmitted by contamination of water, food, finger, flies, etc. to another human being, and these are all the different factors which are responsible, who can aggravate, we call as the risk factors. There is an increased incidence between July and September. Bacilli will be found in water, soil, then milk preparation, food, etc., vegetables, drinking water, open area where defecation and urination are done, poor personal hygiene, health ignorance, etc. can aggravate. So once it enters into the GI tract, then through that stomach, they bypasses even the acid media, they are not destroyed. Once they enter the duodenum, they penetrate the epithelium and invades the lymphoid tissue, where through M cells as a part of a Mars system, they penetrate the epithelial cell via specific receptor, and they proliferate in the submucosa and cause the Peyer's patches hypertrophy. And from there, via lymphatics, it will spread to the blood, and then it will result into what we call as a bacteremia. So once it enters from stomach into the duodenum, it will multiply in Peyer's patches, then it will go into the mesenteric lymph nodes, and then from there into the gallbladder, where it will be stored. Person can become a chronic carrier, or he can shed those particular organisms into stool. Also it can be thrown out in urine. They will also infiltrate into the bone marrow, spleen, liver, etc. And also after multiplication, it will be poured into bloodstream, and at that stage the person will start running fever, high grade fever, which will be step ladder pattern. And at the level of Peyer's patches, it can give rise to ulcer formation, and person can have bleeding, perforation, etc. So after multiplying inflammation, then it will be rupture, it will be going to liver, spleen, bone marrow, lymph nodes, etc. And there it will multiply, particularly in a reticuloendothelial system. They multiply in a macrophages, and they will be stored in a gallbladder, which can predispose to reinfection, or we call as recurrence or relapse. So this is in the first week, person will develop bacteremia. In the second week, it will be spreading to the reticuloendothelial system. There will be necrosis in liver. You will have splenomegaly. Then you will start developing hypertrophy of Peyer's patches, ulceration, intestinal bleeding, intestinal ulceration, that will be seen in a third week. And in a fourth week, person will go into chronic stage, where this particular organism will colonize in gallbladder. Person can become a chronic carrier, and chronic infection may involve joints, bones, meninges, and other sites. So this will be very, very common. This is how the flies can spread the infection to the human being. Flies can carry that material and can contaminate the food materials. So clinical picture wise, you can divide into first week, second week, third week, and rare complications. This is in summary, and then we have got lot of slides where we'll be going through. So in a first week, usually person will come to you with a malaise, headache, cough, sore throat in a prodromal stage. And here the person will start having step ladder type of rising temperature over a period of 4 to 5 days, which is accompanied very frequently by headache, abdominal pain, constipation or diarrhea, and that diarrhea is usually described as a pea soup diarrhea. In second week, that is from 7th to 10th day, there will be mild hepatomegaly, mild splenomegaly, and person will have a relative bradycardia, and you may be able to see rose spots. In third week, now person will start developing a toxic symptoms we call as a typhoid state, where person will have prolonged apathy, toxemia, delirious stage, disorientation, and sometimes person can go even in coma. Diarrhea may further be aggravated, and person might have even intestinal hemorrhage or sometimes even perforation. And when the person goes into the fourth week, now in this particular stage, person can develop odd organs to be involved, like person can have hepatitis, pneumonia, thrombophlebitis, myocarditis, cholecystitis, even nephritis, osteomyelitis, and person can have even CNS involvement. And 2 to 5% will become a chronic carrier. So usually we divide into first week, second week, and third week. Now first week there will be step ladder type of pattern, malaise, headache. In second week, now person along with fever, person will start developing relative bradycardia, weakness, tender abdomen, rose spots, and person will have aggravation of diarrhea, because in first week also person can have diarrhea and constipation. But in third week now he will have toxic symptoms, he will have high grade fever, dehydration, delirium, intestinal bleeding, may have even perforation, and there will be also decrease in the platelet, leukopenia, etc. So in the initial stage, that is in the first week, you will have a step ladder pattern of fever, or we call stepwise increasing level of fever, and you will have a relative bradycardia, because with each 1 degree rise of fever, you will have pulse rate increasing by 10, but instead of that the pulse rate does not increase. That we call is the relative bradycardia, and that is given a name Fagett sign. And this is one of the clinical clue which can give you an idea that probably this is enteric fever or salmonella typhi. But in place of relative bradycardia, if you start getting tachycardia in presence of other clinical symptoms and signs and laboratory parameter, do suspect person is developing complications like hemorrhage, or person is heading towards septicemia. So common symptoms we already mentioned: headache, malaise, anorexia, coated tongue. Coated tongue is also one of the very useful finding, because we usually say fever, coated tongue, abdominal pain, constipation and diarrhea. Gives you a clue that this is probable or suspected case. And once you confirm by laboratory parameters in the form of agglutination test, we call as a probable case. And if you demonstrate culture wise, then only you can label that as confirmed case. Otherwise we call that as probable case, not confirmed case. And on empiric ground, then you can start with the management. Now usually fever is a step ladder type of fever. Relative bradycardia, we already told you, that is called Fagett sign. You will have a soft palpable spleen, mild hepatomegaly, and rose spot will appear in a second week. And muttering or delirious stage or coma vigil, this will appear usually in a third week. So fever with abdominal pain, usually you will get this after 5 to 21 days of ingestion of an infected or contaminated material. So in the first week, usually we come across a high grade fever, stepwise fever, or step ladder pattern of fever. In second week, rose spot and abdominal pain is more common. And in third week, intestinal bleeding, hepatosplenomegaly, there may be intestinal perforation, and even we call that as CNS involvement in the form of a delirious stage. So this will be the common pattern of presentation. And typhoid encephalopathy, that is altered mental status, confusion, delirium, acute psychosis, etc., will be very commonly seen in the 3rd week or 4th week. So first week, usually fever, headache, almost in 80% of the people. Weakness, fatigue will be seen in almost 30% of the people. Sore throat, sometime even you get epistaxis. Usually fever is continuous, step ladder pattern, or we call stepwise increase. Diarrhea and constipation. Diarrhea is more common as compared to constipation. And abdominal pain is present in 30 to 40% with abdominal pain, and person will also have a rose spot. That is commonly seen in usually 2nd week or 2nd week. So rose spot, diarrhea, aches and pains, chest congestion, high grade fever. Very rarely you can come across with typhoid meningitis. That is very common in a 4th week, 3rd week or 4th week, not in a early stage. So dry cough, delirium, frontal headache, malaise. Usually delirium is not common in a 1st week. So in a 2nd week, usually you will come across with a distension of abdomen, hepatosplenomegaly, pain in abdomen, which is quite common in 5 to 6% of the people. We call pea colored diarrhea, which is very common, 22 to 28%. Typical pea color diarrhea. Weight loss, relative bradycardia, continuous high grade fever in almost 51 to 56% of the people. Person will have a coated tongue, step ladder pattern, stepwise increase in the fever. Rose spots will be quite common. You can see these rose spots, quite common. Hepatosplenomegaly. Even they say person can have a dicrotic pulse, relative bradycardia, or that is quite common. And in a 3rd week, now person starts developing the complications in the form of intestinal bleeding, intestinal perforation, CNS involvement in the form of apathy, confusion, psychosis, seizures. Person can even be comatose. So that will be what we call as a typhoid state, quite common. You will have intestinal perforation, intestinal hemorrhage, typhoid cholecystitis, and you can come across some rare complications like myocarditis, pneumonia, osteomyelitis, meningitis, septicemia, and involvement of multi-organs, and you can have septicemic shock. So usually all those things are after 3rd week. And you can also have subconjunctival hemorrhage, myocardial involvement that will also produce tachycardia. You can have pneumonia, 3D pulse, lot of crackles in lungs, and we already mentioned intestinal bleeding, perforation, that will be quite common. And in a 4th week, usually person starts recovering. We call defervescent stage or convalescent stage, where he slowly improves over a period of few days to week. Complication may still occur in spite of, because if it is poorly treated or untreated, the complications are more common. Relapse can occur in 10 to 20% of the patient after 2 to 3 weeks of initial defervescence, because organisms are harbored in gallbladder. So 4th week, usually maybe complication, or person may start recovering, or person may also develop relapse, and they will be more common if the person is having decreased immunity, or person is poorly treated, or person was treated with steroids, etc. So in an untreated typhoid fever, delirious stage, intestinal obstruction, intestinal hemorrhage, bowel perforation are quite common. So this is a common complications which will occur if person is poorly treated or untreated. So relapse will occur almost in 10% of the people, and that will occur 2 to 3 weeks after resolution of fever. And relapse is the return of the disease or the signs and symptoms of the disease after a period of improvement, and that is usually after 2 to 3 weeks of improvement, and that is very frequently depends upon the antibiotic used if not treated properly. And then if person has not consumed the treatment fully or subtherapeutic dose is given, person usually develops what we call as a recrudescence, and person who recovers may go into a stage called chronic carrier stage, who are asymptomatic, and they are almost 1 to 5% of the people, and that will go on shedding the microorganism in stool even after 1 year of resolution. And it is quite common in an adult woman and person particularly with gallstones. Prevention you can do if you use a fresh water, have a good sanitation, have a good hygienic conditions, and if you get vaccinated. So usually incomplete treatment is one of the important cause of relapse and recrudescence. As far as investigations are concerned, the gold standard is a culture of a blood or a serum or a bone marrow or a urine or a stool, depending upon at what stage you are doing an investigations. So first is a clinical suspicion, and that is if any person who is developing a fever, which is a high grade fever with coated tongue, headache, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and person who is having diarrhea and diarrhea or constipation, and person is in a exposed to endemic area, and if the person is having at least minimum 3 or more days of fever with GI symptoms, you must ask for blood culture or stool culture. Usually bone marrow culture is not asked, and you put a empiric diagnosis by doing a test we call as a typhoid dot test, or you can go for a Vidal test. Vidal test will be useful if it is done after 1 week, but by and large now rapid tests are available which will help you to detect quite early. So culture is a gold standard, and that will make a confirmed diagnosis. So good history, then culture of blood in a first week is almost 90% of the time it will give you an idea. Only in 10% of the people you may not be, and particularly in the person who are already treated with antibiotics or previously treated by antibiotics. Bone marrow will also give you almost 90%, but usually that is not being asked for. You can go for duodenal bile culture or stool culture or urine culture usually in a third week. So bile, stool and urine culture is usually important after third week, and that is very rarely being asked for because by that time already person has been treated with lot number of antibiotics. As far as serology test is concerned, Vidal agglutination test is very commonly being done, and that will be important if it is done in a second week of appearance of fever. There is a rapid test which is we call typhoid dot test or rapid test. There are other types of rapid tests are also available that you can do in a first week also. You can go for other laboratory parameters which are of non-specific but may be helpful in treatment part. You can go for a PCR for detection of bacteria, and DISO tests for urine are almost outdated nowadays. So positive culture test and rapid tests are the two important most tests which are, and Vidal. And another very important is your clinical picture. So which gives you an idea of suspicion, and then you can find out by either a rapid test or by a positive culture. So do go for that. Now usually there are some people who are utilizing this criteria we call major criteria and minor criteria. Major criteria usually fever, headache and relative bradycardia. Almost we say that it is 60% accuracy is there. And in a case of a minor criteria like vomiting, splenomegaly, diarrhea, fever, typical pattern of fever and pain in abdomen, that is accounting for 50%. Now usually if there is a 3 major criteria, all the 3 major criteria are present, or 3 major plus 3 minor, or 3 major plus 2 minor or 2 major plus 3 minor, all this will be in favor of suspected case or probable case of enteric fever. But it should be confirmed only by blood culture or by a bone marrow culture or by Vidal test or rapid test. So Vidal test will be positive after 1 week and may be positive up to 5 weeks. Bone marrow and blood culture will be positive in early stage also, as well as after 1 week up to 4 weeks. Urine culture are usually not done. Fecal culture or what we call the stool culture can be done. But by and large, the blood culture is the most commonly which is being asked for in the first week, which will be 90% of the time positive. In second week, blood, fecal and Vidal test will be positive. Blood culture will be 75% of the time, fecal culture will be 50% of the time, because by that time, as the antibiotics are already given, this culture report will be invariably affected because of the use of antibiotics. And Vidal test will become more positive after third week, almost in 80 to 100% of the people. So that will be more useful if it is done in, so rising titer becomes very useful. Other tests like anemia, ESR elevation, thrombocytopenia, lymphopenia and prolonged prothrombin time, activated partial prothrombin time is also prolonged, decreased fibrinogen level, elevated liver enzymes, and even there may be little alteration in electrolytes because of vomiting, etc., like hyponatremia, and person might have even hypokalemia. These are some of the additional findings you might come across which will help you during treatment, but it does not help you anyway in confirming the diagnosis of enteric fever. Very, very rarely you can have a biopsy from the rose spot, absolutely very rarely being done. But most important test is the agglutination test, which can be helpful, which is very easy. And another most important test is the blood culture. But blood culture, if it is done before an antibiotic, will be most beneficial. So in the first week, blood culture, second week, blood culture, and third week, Vidal test will be more useful. Second week, yes, Vidal test, rising titer will be useful. So blood culture is a gold standard in a first week, second week also, and even in a third week. So first week, blood culture, will be very, very useful. Stool culture, usually in a first week, 60 to 70% of the time, it will be negative, but will start becoming positive after second week, and it will be strongly positive in a third week. But this will be possible only if the person is not treated with antibiotics. Otherwise, it will always interfere in that culture report, stool and urine culture report. So by and large, we always rely on Vidal test, typhoid dot test, and there is typhoid dot M test, and that will help you to confirm a probable case rather than confirm the case, because confirmation is only by a presence of microorganism that can be done by a culture. So confirmed case will be diagnosed only by culture report before antibiotic is used, and that will also help you to find out the antibiotic sensitivity test. So by and large, the Vidal test, which can be done by tube or slide method, or you can go for a rapid test which is called typhoid dot test, which will help you to detect IgG and IgM. There are other rapid kits are also available, which is one step rapid test, which will help you to detect IgM and IgG. But in a Vidal test, you can do it by a tube method or by a slide method, and this will be tube agglutination test or a slide agglutination test, which will help you to detect presence of antibody, which can be flagellar antibody, which is H, or somatic antigen, which is O. antibody. So you will be able to detect, and that will be based after 7 days of infection. And if agglutination is positive, we'll say that the antibodies are present in the serum, and if agglutination is negative, we'll say that antibodies are not present in serum. But that does not rule out enteric fever. So it is very, very important to interpret Vidal test or typhoid dot test. Detection of antibody will be done by Vidal test and typhoid dot test, while detection of an antigen you can do in serum by Tubex method or by ELISA or immunoelectrophoresis. And detection of an antigen in urine you can do by Tubex system or latex agglutination or by cold co-agglutinations. Usually these are not commonly being done. The most commonly which is being done is Vidal test and typhoid dot test. Usually Vidal test will be done in a person who is having a fever and who is a suspected case and who had visited the area where there is an epidemic or an endemic area. Also it can be utilized as a screening test in a person who is having fever and who is living in an endemic area, or if the person who is having a fever for at least more than 1 week, and it can be done in a healthy individual for a baseline titer who is living in an endemic area. This is a slide method. I am not going into detail how exactly the Vidal test is being done. This is a tube method, and if you come across this precipitation, we call as agglutination, and you come across these clumps, then it is said to be positive. And if you don't see any agglutination and the top layer is absolutely clear, supernatant is hazy, and there is a button formation, these are called button formation, then this is considered as negative. So this will be a classical way of making out at what dilution the agglutination is positive. So if you get anti-O titer more than 1 in 80, and if you get an H antibody titer more than 1 in 160, it is usually considered as positive. But if O titer is more than 1 in 80, it indicates active infection, and if H titer is very high, more than 1 in 160, it usually indicates the past infection or an immunized person. Hence, this particular is quite important, that is titer of O, H, AH is what we call as paratyphi, A, B. If it is above 1 in 80, these are H titer, which are all above 1 in 80, then it is diagnostically significant. But this interpretation is not fixed and may be very from place to place, because this particular will depend upon even a carrier person. In carrier person also it will be positive. So suppose if the initial titer of O was 1 in 40 and after 1 week it becomes 1 in 160, so it is 4 times the original. Now this suggests that this is an active infection. But if there is no rising titer, it is almost ruling out enteric fever. But always you have to keep it in mind. Antibiotic treatment will prevent the rise in the titer. This is the most important drawback, because immediately the person who is having a fever is put on antibiotics. So you may not get a rising titer. But if still there is a rising titer, it will suggest that Vidal test is positive and person is suffering from typhoid fever. So this is a slide method. This is test tube method. So if O titer is more than 1 in 80 and H titer more than 1 in 160, will almost tells you that person is having enteric fever, maybe false positive in unapparent infection in an immunized person or previously infected person, or even sometime in case of a carrier stage. So rising titer is more in favor, and if the titer is more than 1 in 80 and H titer more than 1 in 160 will be more in favor. And if you look at H titer of paratyphy that will also help you to identify paratyphy infections. And if H antibody titer of typhoid Salmonella typhi is elevated, that will be in favor of what we call as plain simple enteric fever due to Salmonella typhi. Also, don't forget, it will be positive in convalescent stage, anamnestic response, and even after vaccination. So this is one example which is being given. If person comes with O titer 1 in 160 and H typhi titer 1 in 640, straightforward this is in favor of enteric fever. But if O titer is positive but H titer is 1 in 80, then this puts you suspicion. You should go for a clinical criteria and look for rising titer. So interpretation is that one must be aware of a local baseline titer. Single test report may be significant if the titer is very high. If the titer is low, repeat after 7 to 10 days and look for the rising titer. Titer if they are often low in an early stage of infection or partially treated patient, and it may be also low in person with HIV positive. Antigenic cross reaction can occur with other species also. Anamnestic response, that is a past enteric fever or unrelated fever, also can have Widal test positive. Prior immunization may also give rise to Widal test positive. So do look for all these conditions. For a safety purpose, always handle all sample with, because they may be containing microorganism, so potentially infectious. So blood samples, urine sample, stool samples, etc. should be handled with care. Handle all reagent with care and avoid contact. While handling, don't try to touch your eye, mouth or skin. Do not perform this test by doing a mouth pipette. Always use the other pipettes. Discard the used reagent and sample as per BMW, that is the disposal guidelines, followed in a healthcare setting. You must take all this precaution, otherwise the person who is handling this material will be more prone to get infections. There are rapid kits which are available like Typhi dots or Rapid kits. Those are available and you can find out IgM or IgG. And here we have got 4 slides. Here you can see that IgM is positive, IgG is negative, which suggests early primary infection. Here IgG is positive, IgM is negative. So IgG positive, so this suggests the late infection or latent infection, or person has been already infected before. If IgM and IgG both are positive, means active primary infection, or person is having a repeat infection. And if both are negative, usually we say that person is having no infection. A negative result cannot rule out typhoid fever. Always keep this thing in mind, because it will be negative in an early stage. And here what you are detecting is IgG and IgM. Blood culture is a gold standard. Bone marrow will be again a gold standard, but usually by and large not done. Blood culture is the most common mode of doing that. Stool culture and urine culture are also not commonly being done, because by that time already antibiotics are given and you may not be getting a proper reports. So blood culture should be done as early as possible, even before starting the antibiotics. ELISA method is another method of detecting the antigens of Salmonella typhi. RT-PCR can be also utilized for detecting an antigen of Salmonella typhi. Immunoassay can be utilized by ELISA technique or by immunoelectrophoresis. Then there is also one another technology which is being there. Molecular immunology can be also done, but these are in a sophisticated laboratory. Nanotechnology is the another which can be utilized. and this is also available in a selective pathological laboratories. Always you should rule out this enteric fever from viral infections, malaria, leptospirosis, dengue, chikungunya, etc. Because these are the most common infections which you will see in your everyday practice. Viral infection, particularly upper respiratory tract, most common. Malaria is another very common in India. Leptospirosis is not so common in India. Dengue, chikungunya is another very common in India. Now we come to the management part. It will depend upon the local resistance pattern. Good number of time you will have a multi-resistance organism or extended or extensively drug resistant strain involving the human being. In that, first line of treatment is always fluoroquinolones, azithromycin, ceftriaxone or carbapenem. And for severe infections like person who is developing a complications like meningitis, you must treat simultaneously with dexamethasone. Avoid antacids, H2 receptor antagonists, proton pump inhibitors, etc. should be avoided. In some person where these fluoroquinolones, etc. are not effective because cotrimazole is not commonly being utilized, looking at the antibiotic sensitive report, you can use clotrimazole. Because good number of time as this is not being utilized in your everyday practice, bacteria are sensitive to cotrimazole, and particularly in person who develops intestinal complications, ampicillin, ciprofloxacillin, those are very useful. So isolation, bed rest is a must. Good nursing care and supportive treatment in the form of a good nutritious diet, healthy diet, symptomatic treatment mainly in the form of antipyretics. Don't use NSAID, don't use aspirin, don't give steroid. And then you can go for a special treatment we call as an antibiotic depending upon the culture report and antibiotic sensitivity. By and large, before you send a culture and go for antibiotic sensitivity, the empiric treatment should be started after collecting a blood sample for culture. So ceftriaxone and azithromycin are the most common which are being utilized. How much dose to be given is mentioned here. At your leisure time you can go through. It should be given for a full 7 to 14 days. But once you get the culture report and antibiotic sensitivity, you can change over the drug which is sensitive. So treatment of fully drug susceptible infection should be done, and most common first line of treatment is ciprofloxacillin. Second line of treatment is amoxicillin. Chloramphenicol should be used with little caution, and sulfa with trimethoprim is the another group of drug which is of a choice, particularly as a second line of treatment. In a multi-drug resistance, ceftriaxone, ciprofloxacillin and azithromycin are the most preferred drug because yet bacteria are not resistant to azithromycin and ceftriaxone. But even these antibiotics should be used with caution. And treatment of fluoroquinolone resistant infection, the drug of choice is ceftriaxone, azithromycin and high dose of ciprofloxacillin, because yet the bacteria are sensitive to ciprofloxacillin and they have become resistant to the routine fluoroquinolones like levofloxacillin, etc. So those are not preferred drugs in person who are having enteric fever, and these are the doses which you should keep it in mind, and at your leisure time you can go through that in detail. So again, antibiotics has to be given for minimum 10 to 15 days, or we say 10 to 14 days. For fever after resolution, 10 days after resolution. Quinolones mainly, if not quinolone resistance, then ciprofloxacillin you can give 500 milligram BD, or you can give in the form of injection, particularly in a complicated case, 400 milligram IV BD for 10 days. Ofloxacillin is the another drug which you can utilize. But levofloxacillin nowadays it is resistant, so levofloxacillin should be avoided. Cefixime is one of the drug which can be given orally, but ceftriaxone is a base drug which you can give in the form of 2 to 3 gram IV OD, but by and large it is divided into split doses and is given for 10 to 14 days. Another drug of choice is a cefotaxime, but the first drug of choice will be ceftriaxone, and then after a complete recovery you can switch over to oral if injectable is not being advised. You can switch over to oral if person is comfortable and can take orally. Chloramphenicol is a drug which is utilized in the person who are sensitive to chloramphenicol. In severe typhoid and CNS involvement along with ceftriaxone, IV dexamethasone is commonly being used. So these two slides gives you an idea regarding which antibiotics you should go for. So fluoroquinolone, ciprofloxacillin and ofloxacillin are the drug of choice. And third generation of cephalosporin, particularly ceftriaxone and cefotaxime are the drug of choice. Most commonly utilized is ceftriaxone, is the most commonly being utilized in the form of IV. And these are the drugs doses. Ciprofloxacillin we go up to 750 milligram, and we go 500 milligram BD, ofloxacillin 400 milligram BD for minimum 10 to 14 days. And orally if you want to give, this will be the doses. I'm skipping because this will become a very long chapter. So fluoroquinolones usually is contraindicated in children during pregnancy and lactation. So during that particular time, you will have to go to either azithromycin or to ceftriaxone. Azithromycin in a children 10 to 20 milligram per kilogram body weight per day in a single dose, preferably for 7 days. So by and large we say that 1 gram per day once daily for 7 days. Almost this will be more than enough, because fluoroquinolones in children can produce tendinitis, tendon rupture and cartilage damage. So avoid that in a children and during pregnancy. So these are the doses which are used in children particularly of ceftriaxone, and these are the azithromycin dose. Fluoroquinolones with azithromycin will increase the risk of regular what we call as QT prolongation, and because of QT prolongation person can develop tachyarrhythmias and it can be life threatening. So see that the person who is on fluoroquinolones does not receive azithromycin, and person who is on azithromycin don't combine fluoroquinolones. We say uncomplicated case and complicated case. In an uncomplicated case, you can start with ciprofloxacillin and you can replace after 3 to 4 days. If there is no response, you can switch over to third generation cephalosporin, and then if required injectable forms. While in a complicated case, you have to start with the intravenous ceftriaxone, and if there is no response, you can switch over to meropenem. Intravenous ceftriaxone usually is given in the form of a 2 gram to 3 gram in a day, and total duration should be 10 to 14 days. If person is untreated, then mortality rate is 15 to 30%. And if there is a proper treatment which is being given after doing a culture and antibiotic sensitivity, the mortality rate can be reduced to as less as 1%, and it is a wonderful results. Empiric treatment is usually should be avoided. You should go for a proper treatment. Empiric treatment will be Improper doses. You will be using a drug which is not effective on a Salmonella typhi, and good number of times Salmonella typhi are resistant to that antibiotic. So always see that you don't continue with the empiric treatment. Always go for a blood culture or use the drug which is most sensitive, and best drug is third generation cephalosporin, azithromycin, and among fluoroquinolones, ciprofloxacillin and ofloxacillin. So in a carrier stage, you can use amoxicillin, cotrimazole, ciprofloxacillin, or even a norfloxacillin. Any one of these can be used in a carrier stage, and these are the doses, and it is given in the form of an oral route. And very rarely you require a cholecystectomy, particularly if the person persists to have culture report positive. What is most important is prevention, and prevention is done by personal hygiene. So you have to prevent contamination of food, fluid, milk. You take care of finger, flies, and personal hygienes. That is absolutely necessary. And another thing which is most important is vaccination. So these are most important thing. So scrub your hand properly before touching the food. So take care of reservoir, route of transmission, and susceptible persons. If you cannot boil it, cook it, peel it, and then forget it. You can use different vaccines which are available. So that will be very, very important. So personal hygiene, care of foods, contamination, cleaning of foods, fruits, vegetables, etc. is absolutely necessary. For prevention, wash your hands, wash fruits, vegetables, drink boiled water, and get vaccinated is a must. And these are some of the things which will be very, very helpful: treatment, prevention, and preventing infecting other individuals. So these are absolutely necessary. So for prevention, wash your hands, avoid drinking water which is untreated, avoid raw foods and vegetables, clean them properly, and choose always a hot food, and peel off the skin, etc. And prevent infecting other by washing your hands, take your antibiotics properly, and avoid handling food materials. The infected person should avoid that. So ask for a drinks without ice unless the ice is made from a bottle or a boiled water. So good nutritious diet is absolutely necessary, and the diet should be immune boosting. So proper vaccination should be done. You can use a live attenuated vaccine or inactivated vaccine, whichever is available. And all persons who are travelers, who are the people in an endemic area, laboratory workers, all those should be vaccinated. And you can utilize any one of these vaccine, either TAB vaccine or oral vaccine like TY21A or VI capsular polysaccharide vaccine. Any one of those vaccine you can use. So you can use any one of those vaccine. Typhoid vaccine V1 or Typhivax or Typhi oral or TAB vaccine can be utilized, and all these persons should be vaccinated. Person who are in an endemic area, household contacts, group at the risk like school children, hospital staffs, and person who are attending meals and yatra, melas, yatras, etc. Melas and yatra, particularly there they will be more prone to get these infections. Complications like acute bronchitis, lobar pneumonia, toxic myocarditis, venous thrombophlebitis, hemolytic anemias, acute typhoid nephritis, typhoid meningitis, peripheral neuritis, etc. are quite common. This is parotitis, bronchitis, pneumonia, pulmonary infarcts, myocarditis, fatty liver, hepatitis, abscess, cholecystitis, cholangitis, even pancreatitis, intestinal perforation, peritonitis, hemorrhage, CNS complications like encephalitis, meningitis, transverse myelitis, encephalopathy, musculoskeletal like osteomyelitis, arthritis, myositis, and even eye can be involved in the form of uveitis. All these complications, these are big list of complications. You can see a big list. There are a lot of complications. Even DIC can be there. Even paralytic ileus, orchitis, empyema, lot number of complications. These are divided according to the neuropsychiatric complication. At your leisure time you can go through. These are respiratory, cardiovascular and hepatobiliary complications. These are intestinal, genitourinary and hemolytic complications. At your leisure time you can have a pause and you can go through. So I end my lecture here. Sorry for a long lecture. Thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable and I appreciate that you have spent some of the time with me. I feel this lecture will be very helpful to you because you will come across in your everyday practice. You will see some person in your family, in your society, in your friends, etc., in your groups also. And you should also take all those precautions so that you don't get enteric fever. If you like this particular lecture, please press button like, have a comment so that I can improve. And if you feel that this lecture is helpful to your friends, you can share with your friends also. And your suggestion will be always welcome. See you in next lecture.